I'm Kamali, taking you through some of the things people are talking about and some of the stuff they're sharing around the world on Newsfeed today. The reaction to the death of a 2-year-old whose story gripped India for days. As the demand for precious metals used in smartphones grows and grows, we look at the mineral wars of Central Africa. It's 96 years since the founding of the Turkish Republic. Celebrations have been held across the country and across the internet. And on the anniversary of the Wall Street crash, we tell you 5 things you may not have known. And a dog being declared a hero. Its name is classified. And top of our newsfeed, pray for Sujith. We go to India now for the story of a little boy and the failed efforts to free him from the well he'd fallen into. Here's Rebecca.
Tragically, 2-year-old Sujith Wilson, who fell down an abandoned bore well while playing, was found dead following a rescue operation which lasted more than 80 hours. The incident in the South Indian state of Tamil Nadu attracted a lot of attention over the past few days, and now people are of course saddened by the news of the young child's death. It's been the Diwali holiday here, which is a huge Indian festival, and that's only added to the tragedy. Rest in peace, Sujith has been trending on Twitter as people have been expressing their condolences. The smallest coffins are the heaviest is a comment that appears a lot. Rescuers used heavy machinery to try to drill their way to the boy, but they only retrieved the decomposed body. The issue has raised questions about negligence surrounding abandoned bore wells in the country, and there are some suggestions that fines could be introduced perhaps. This Tamil Nadu minister tweets this poster that's being circulated on social media calling for abandoned wells to be closed. There have also been questions on whether the rescue operation could have been executed more efficiently. One person writes, if a device cannot be invented to rescue kids who fall into deep bore wells, at least the government can come up with a standard operating procedure for rescue. Many hope that now authorities in India will take action to prevent any such further deaths.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the other things that caught our eye on social media. Well, this is Sergeant Keith Wildhaber. He's been awarded $20 million by the St. Louis Police Department after it was shown that he was passed over for promotion more than 20 times and is told to tone down his gayness, whatever that means. There have been calls for the Chief of Police of the St. Louis Department to resign, as he's been described as running a department that is institutionally homophobic. As an example of how ridiculous the world can be sometimes, this rare Pokemon card called the Pikachu Illustrator has been sold for $195,000. Yes, $195,000, enough to buy a couple of houses in some places, maybe provide for a family member's college tuition or medical bills, or just not work for a while. But the person who bought it decided to buy a little card with a little yellow monster on. In great news for fans of Star Wars, the 2 guys who ruined the last couple of seasons of Game of Thrones when they stopped using the source material say they've pulled out of making 3 new Star Wars movies. David Benioff and Dan Weiss say they are too busy with a $200 million contract with Netflix. It's all right for some. And hashtag 29 Ekim is a top trend as it's the 96th anniversary of the Turkish Republic. Google's Doodle is also marking the day. There have been celebrations all over the nation. Cumhuriyet Bayramınız kutlu olsun. Well, now to Central Africa. Rwanda recently announced it will begin manufacturing Africa's first smartphone, and that got us thinking. All smartphones make use of precious metals, many of which are extracted from the ground in Africa, and this growing industry has been the cause of simmering conflict. Here's Esra.
What do smartphones and smart cars have in common? Not the price, not the technology. A mineral, cobalt. Cars and tech companies are in a scramble to secure supply of it because they need cobalt to power their devices. But most of the supplies of this rare metal comes from a conflict-ridden country in Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo. A nation the size of Western Europe mines 60% of world's cobalt. And it's not just cobalt, but gold, copper, diamonds and other precious metals. But DRC is one of the poorest nations on earth, which has suffered decades of conflict. DRC has had a painful history of colonialism, followed by successive corrupt regimes. But its most recent crisis has roots in Rwanda. In 1994, the Hutus' genocide against Tutsis in Rwanda caused an influx of Hutu refugees and armed fighters into the eastern DRC. Some years later, with DRC support, Hutu militias began attacking Rwanda. What is referred to as the Great War of Africa, which started in 1998, the fighting lasted for 5 years and killed over 5.4 million people. During the war, members of the Rwandan forces are reported to have begun looting DRC's mineral reserves. It led to the UN Security Council to declare a plunder of Congo's resources in 2001.
There have been allegations for a very long time that illegally produced tin and tantalite from Congo has been illegally brought into Rwanda and then mixed in with Rwandan stock and then exported as purely Rwandan.
Rwanda is also accused of supporting an insurgency in DRC, which has forced almost 500,000 people to flee their homes. The government in Kigali deny they are involved. The mining in DRC continues to provide employment to millions of people, sometimes even children, and many rebel groups continue to fight over mineral-rich regions.
You need to look at these situations where government control is very weak and has allowed armed groups to flourish and to take control of territory. And in turn, those armed groups have turned to mining as a way to generate funds to buy weapons or to feed themselves.
This raises ethical questions for big corporations like Apple, BMW, and Volkswagen. Some companies say they will stop sourcing cobalt from Congo, but some experts say a boycott would not be practical, and it would also cause further distress to some of the poorest people in the world.
There are companies that do their best to reduce the possibility that minerals produced and traded by an armed group end up in their supply chains. So consumers can educate themselves about what they're buying, so what brands they should go to. I don't want to recommend any particular brand, but there is a lot of information available online about where consumers can buy a particular phone and what that company producing the phone is doing to make sure that there are no conflict minerals involved in the phone.
Rwanda continues to be seen as an African success story, as its neighbour continues its fight for basics like peace, health and a stable economy, and a land so gifted with resources which now seems cursed.
Okay, let's take a look at some other stories you might need to know this Tuesday. Now, Google are being sued by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. The ACCC accused the ad agency and search engine of misleading its users when describing how location data is stored and used. The ACCC says Google has breached Australian law and is seeking fines and changes in policy as recompense. Joshua Wong, who was a key leader in the 2014 Occupy movement in Hong Kong, has been barred from running for a local district council position. Reporting says the ban is in place because Wong is accused of advocating for independence for Hong Kong from China. Now, such a thing would be in violation of basic law, which will see Hong Kong become part of China in 2047. In France, an 84-year-old man has been arrested after allegedly shooting two men and attempting to set fire to a mosque. Claude Sinker is a former candidate for the Front National Party, one of France's far-right parties. This happened in Bayonne in the southwest of the country, and politicians in France have made statements calling for solidarity with Muslims. Well, this flag, called the Kyokujusuki, or the Rising Sun, is said by people in South Korea to be as offensive to them as the Nazi flag is to Jewish people or the Confederate flag is to African Americans. And South Korean politicians are pressuring Japan and the International Olympic Committee to not allow it to be flown during next summer's Olympic Games in Tokyo. The flag was used by Imperial Japan during World War II when the nation occupied Korea, and is used today by Japanese far-right groups. Well, today marks 90 years since Black Tuesday, marking the end of an epic 4-day loss of the stock market known as the Wall Street crash in the United States and signalling the beginning of the Great Depression. So how did it happen and who was most affected? Let's take a look. Here are some of the things you need to know about that moment in history. Here's Adama.
In what was described as the Roaring Twenties, the decade known for mass consumerism, the Harlem Renaissance and flapper culture, America saw incredible industrial and economic growth. Americans were earning higher wages than they had before, with more people investing in the stock market. The future was looking bright for many Americans, but this all changed in 1929. On Black Thursday, the Dow Industrial Average, the index used to judge the value of the US market, lost 11% of its value at the opening bell. By October 29th, Black Tuesday, the Dow had fallen again, by almost 25% over 4 trading days. Panicked investors sold more than 16 million shares, and the crash lost the equivalent of $396 billion in today's money. What followed was rampant unemployment, foreclosures on everything from banks to businesses, and inevitable widespread poverty. The US had faced several depressions before, but the 1929 crash marked the start of the longest and most severe to date. So, who was affected and how? Life had to be frugal for American families who tried to hold on to vestiges of their former wealth like cars. Trips to the movies were too expensive, and potlucks grew as a way to share food. Financial strain took its toll, and the national suicide rate reached an all-time high in the years to follow. Despite high unemployment, more women entered the workforce. From 1930 to 1940, women's employment rose from 10.5 million people to 13 million. They often found jobs in sectors less impacted by the stock market, such as agriculture, education, secretarial work, and nursing. The Great Depression added to the woes of African Americans who already faced rampant racial discrimination. They were the first to be laid off from work and faced unemployment at twice or 3 times the rate as that of white people. They also received less financial aid, but economic hardship led to the growth of political advancements like the Jobs for Negroes movement and the 1936 National Negro Congress. Likewise, Mexican and Asian Americans also suffered. Much of the work done by Chinese and Japanese immigrants to the US no longer existed. The communities were attacked for driving down wages by working for less than their white counterparts. Similarly, Mexican Americans were blamed for taking jobs away from white Americans, leading to mass deportations and detainment. It took 23 years for the US to recover from the Wall Street crash. And while the economy seems stable in 2019, history has a habit of repeating itself.
And last up, an animal doing stuff, and this one did something that is pretty brave. Now, this is a picture of the dog which apparently chased the former leader of Daesh into a tunnel. It hasn't been named. Trump says its name is classified, but some clever Twitterers had their own suggestion. This one called it Indognito. Very good. Now, the dog went viral after Trump referred to it multiple times in his press conference over the weekend.
It was actually, look, nobody was even hurt. Our canine, as I call it a dog, a beautiful dog, a talented dog, was injured and brought back.
Well, that is all from the Newsfeed team. Reach out to me with your questions, comments, complaints and suggestions. You'll find me at Kamali Melbourne. You'll find us 24/7 on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and follow me on Twitter. Follow, subscribe and add. See you again tomorrow.